Why was she sitting alone at graduation, when everyone else seemed desperate to be seen? The chair beneath her wobbled every time someone laughed nearby, a cheap metal leg, uneven, as if even the furniture knew she didn't belong. Arya Solberg didn't adjust it, didn't complain. She sat perfectly still, shoulders squared, hands resting calmly in her lap. Too calm for a girl everyone had already decided was a failure. The air was heavy, humid, the kind of heat that made polyester gowns cling and tempers rise. Around her, families leaned toward one another, whispering names, futures, colleges. Pride floated in the air like perfume, except here, in the last row, where Arya had been placed with a deliberate gap on either side, a quiet exile no one pretended not to notice. Someone behind her snickered. She barely passed anything, a voice said. Another laughed. Why is she even here? Arya didn't turn around. She kept her eyes forward, scanning exits out of habit, a reflex she hadn't learned in classrooms. The ceremony hadn't even begun when the first insult landed. A boy she barely remembered, rich smile, empty eyes, approached with mock seriousness. Instead of honor cords, he dropped a loop of fraying twine over her shoulders. It smelled like mildew, like a janitor's closet. Laughter rippled outward as if on cue. A special award, he announced loudly, for barely existing. The rope scratched her neck, irritating. She adjusted her collar slightly, shielding her skin. No anger, no reaction, just control. She recognized the knot instantly, poorly tied, weak, wouldn't hold under pressure. She wondered briefly if it would make a decent tourniquet. A guidance counselor followed soon after, pointing at her boots with a look of disgust. Uniform violation, he said, slapping a bright sticker onto her shoulder hard enough to sting. Neon orange, impossible to miss. Parents stared. Some shook their heads, others smiled in quiet satisfaction. Arya didn't remove the sticker. They were fire-resistant flight boots. Regulations mattered, just not the ones he cared about. The screens behind the stage flickered alive. A poll appeared, anonymous, cruel. Who will still be living in their parents' basement in 10 years? Her name shot to the top instantly, 99%. Digital confetti exploded across the screen. The crowd roared. Arya watched the numbers climb, her expression unreadable. She noticed the unsecured network routing the vote, the sloppy encryption. The irony almost made her smile. Almost. A teacher took the microphone next, played an old audio clip, her voice, distorted, mocked, labeled as failure. The audience laughed again. They didn't know that recording had been made during a negotiation, that those guttural sounds had saved lives, that the coordinates embedded in the cadence were still classified. She swallowed, not from shame, from memory. Then came the fast food recruiter, kneeling beside her like she was broken, offering charity disguised as opportunity. The paper hat crinkled in her hands. She folded it neatly, precise, clean. She wondered how many people here knew what real hunger felt like. The principal called her name last. He paused before handing her the diploma. Let the laughter bloom. The lowest grades in school history, he said proudly. Arya stepped forward anyway, took the paper, met his eyes without flinching. A man sanitized his hands instead of shaking hers. Someone tried to trip her on the stairs. A drunk parent poked her chest and told her she was dead weight. She stepped around him, calm, controlled. Every insult stacked on the last, every laugh pressed down harder. The cruelty wasn't accidental, it was coordinated, systematic, almost impressive in its commitment. Still, Arya didn't break. Inside, something else stirred, not anger, not revenge. Timing. Her pocket vibrated, once, then again. She didn't look yet. On the field, the graduates lined up. A bucket of red dye hovered above her position, ready to fall. A laser dot appeared suddenly between someone's eyes on the gantry, then vanished. Arya adjusted her collar. The threat evaporated. The wind shifted 2 degrees north. She zipped her jacket to her chin, hiding what lay beneath. Her heart rate stayed steady, 60 beats per minute. Then the sound arrived. Low, distant, growing. A rhythmic thunder that didn't belong at a graduation. People shaded their eyes, confused, nervous. Someone laughed it off. Arya didn't move. The sky darkened. Balloons strained against their strings. Programs lifted and scattered like startled birds. The first Apache crested the trees. Rotor wash slammed into the field with brutal force. Chairs skidded. People screamed. The laughter died instantly, swallowed by sound so loud it vibrated bone. The helicopter didn't just pass overhead. It stopped. Hovering low, dominant, intentional. A voice boomed from the speakers, cutting through the chaos. Lieutenant Arya Solberg, report. Silence fell like a held breath. Arya reached for the zipper of her dress. And everything they thought they knew about her began to collapse. Why did the crowd gasp when the zipper slid down? And why did no one laugh this time? Because the sound that followed wasn't fabric. It was reality tearing open. Arya didn't rush the motion. She pulled the zipper slowly, deliberately, letting the cheap black dress fall away from her shoulders like something already finished with its purpose. Gasps rippled through the front rows first, then confusion, then fear. Beneath the dress wasn't skin. It was structure. Olive drab fabric, reinforced seams, Velcro tabs worn soft from use, rank stitched clean and sharp over the chest. Silver wings caught the sun for half a second, long enough to burn the image into every retina's watching. Someone near the podium whispered, "That's not a costume." They were right. The colonel's boots hit the grass hard, not rushed, not theatrical. Each step carried authority that didn't need permission. Colonel Huxley Drosser didn't look at the students first. He looked at the adults, the administrators, the board members who had been so comfortable minutes ago. "The individual you humiliated," he said evenly, "is an active-duty combat pilot." A pause. The youngest ever assigned to Phantom Talon. A sound escaped the crowd, not laughter this time. Something closer to breath leaving lungs all at once. Arya stood perfectly still as soldiers formed around her. Their backs faced her, rifles low, controlled, protective. The message was unmistakable even to people who had never seen a battlefield. She wasn't one of them. They were in her way. The same girl who had been offered a paper hat minutes earlier now accepted a flight helmet from a kneeling specialist. He didn't speak casually, didn't smile, just waited. "Uplink established, Lieutenant," he said, "awaiting your authorization." She nodded once. The cheerleaders looked at one another, frozen. One of them started crying without understanding why. The valedictorian's mouth hung open, his speech notes sliding unnoticed from his hands into the grass. Principal Vale tried to laugh. It came out wrong. This is obviously a misunderstanding," he said, stepping forward. "Our school." Colonel Drosser cut him off by slapping a document flat against his chest. "Red stamp, federal seal." "You interfered with a classified assets education," the colonel said quietly. "That's not a misunderstanding, that's an investigation." Vale's hands shook as the paper fluttered to the ground. Arya didn't look at him. Her attention was on the horizon, on the wind, on the Apache hovering low enough that the grass bent beneath it like surrender. Inside her chest, something tightened, not pride, not triumph. Relief. Because the pretending was finally over. A man the students knew only as Crazy Mike sprinted toward the field. Parents screamed. Security moved too late. He vaulted the fence with frightening ease and snapped into a salute so crisp it cracked the air. "Perimeter secure," he barked. The recognition hit slowly. The tattered coat, the limp, the eyes that had been watching all along. Someone whispered, "That homeless guy." Wasn't. The mascot tackled a belligerent parent with perfect form. The plush head came off, camouflage beneath. A soldier, real, focused. Every lie collapsed at once. Arya slid the helmet on, the world dimming behind the visor. The noise softened. Her breathing steadied. She keyed the external speaker. "Tower Talon 1, she said calmly. "Debris on the runway." The sentence wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It erased everything else. Celeste tried to speak, tried to cry, tried to rewrite history with tears and charm. Arya didn't look at her. "Not worth targeting." The guidance counselor attempted to smile. The board members reached for hands they'd refused earlier. Arya stepped past them. She stopped only once when she saw the cafeteria worker through the glass, kneeling, scraping cake off the floor with shaking hands. Arya paused, removed a patch from her suit, walked to the door, placed it gently in the woman's palm. "For believing I was worth feeding," she said softly. The woman stared at the insignia, not understanding, only feeling something sacred had just been handed to her. Behind them, chaos erupted, phones confiscated, files seized, a shredded letter recovered and acceptance never delivered, gasps again, this time filled with guilt. Arya climbed into the Apache. Hands moved across switches with muscle memory so deep it felt like instinct. The cockpit sealed. The world outside reduced to data and heat signatures and clean lines. The rotor wash intensified. Parents stumbled backward. Decorations ripped free. The graduation arch collapsed under its own symbolism. As the aircraft lifted, Arya glanced down once. The people who had laughed looked small now, not powerless, just small. She didn't feel hatred. She felt distance. "Talon leader," came a familiar voice. "Ready when you are." Arya smiled. "Copy," she replied. "Let's fly." The Apache surged upward, slicing cleanly into the sky. The noise followed her like a closing chapter. And for the first time in years, Arya Solberg wasn't holding anything back. She was exactly where she belonged. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. Why did the sky feel quieter once the helicopter leveled out? And why did the noise fade inside her long before it disappeared below? Because altitude changes perspective. The school shrank fast. The field became geometry. People turned into dots that scattered without meaning. Arya watched it all through the HUD without emotion, hands steady on the controls, breath measured. The Apache responded to her like it always did, obedient, precise, alive in a way people rarely were. Only when the clouds swallowed the town did her jaw unclench. Rowan's voice came through the comms, calm, familiar. "You good?" Arya didn't answer immediately. She adjusted trim, checked fuel flow, ran the habit loops she'd learned when silence was safer than speech. "I'm airborne," she said finally. "That's good enough." Rowan didn't push. He never did. The formation tightened. 2 escorts slid into place with professional ease, flares armed but unused. No celebration. No unnecessary theatrics. This wasn't victory. It was extraction. Below them, the noise of humiliation was gone, but memory wasn't altitude-dependent. As the flight path stabilized, the past crept in not as images but sensations. The smell of dust, the pressure of heat on skin, the way fear tasted metallic just before it turned into focus. She remembered the first time she learned how invisible competence could be. She'd been 14, too small for her age, too quiet to matter, the kind of student teachers forgot to call on, the kind classmates forgot entirely unless they needed notes or answers. That was when the man from the Aerospace Scholarship Committee had found her. He didn't wear a uniform, didn't announce importance. He sat beside her during lunch one day, unwrapping a sandwich like any other parent volunteer. "You built the gyroscope," he said casually. Arya froze. "I didn't submit that," she replied. He smiled faintly. "No, you tested it." That was how it began, questions disguised as curiosity, math problems that weren't in textbooks, simulations framed as games. She didn't know she was being evaluated, only that someone finally spoke her language. When the offer came, it wasn't dramatic. No flag, no oath, just a quiet question. "How do you feel about disappearing?" She thought of the empty seat at lunch, the way teachers avoided eye contact, the way her name always came last. "I already have," she'd said. Training didn't make her special. It stripped her. Sleep deprivation, stress inoculation, being ignored on purpose, corrected without comfort, pushed until silence became the only stable thing inside her. They didn't praise excellence, they punished complacency. She learned to fly before she learned to drive, learned to land blind before she learned to trust, learned how to breathe through panic without letting it change her pulse. And through all of it, she went back to school. Sat in classrooms after night missions, took tests with hands that still smelled like fuel and metal, missed exams for deployments no one could explain. They called it failing. She called it compartmentalization. The Apache cut through clouds, sunlight breaking across the canopy. Arya adjusted heading by a degree. Small movements mattered, always had. "Command wants a debrief tonight," Rowan said. "They'll scrub the footage, but the media's already chewing." "Let them," Arya replied. There was no bitterness in her voice, just certainty. Because the hardest part wasn't exposure. It was restraint. She thought of the insults she hadn't answered, the lies she hadn't corrected, the rage she'd swallowed so deeply it had calcified into discipline. Not because she was weak, because reacting would have revealed her too soon. The Apache banked west. Below them, mountains rose, ancient, indifferent. Arya felt her shoulders ease as terrain replaced memory. Rowan spoke again, softer now. "You didn't have to stay quiet that long." Arya considered that. "Yes," she said, "I did." Because if she'd spoken earlier, they would have doubted, questioned, tried to own the story, turned her into a mascot instead of a weapon. Silence had protected her, but it had also cost her. She thought of Mrs. Gable, the cake on the floor, the only kindness that hadn't asked for proof. She thought of the janitor, the nod, the salute, recognition without explanation. There were always others like her, quiet, watching, carrying weight without applause. They were the ones she flew for. The radio crackled with a new voice, calm, female, older. "Talon 1, this is command. You're cleared to base. Debrief in 2 hours, and Lieutenant." A pause. "Well done." Arya closed her eyes for half a second. Not because she needed validation, but because it still felt strange to receive it without condition. The base came into view as dusk settled, concrete and steel, framed by orange sky. The Apache descended smoothly, rotors slowing as the ground crew moved in practiced choreography. When the canopy lifted, the smell of fuel and warm air rushed in. Arya removed her helmet and climbed down without ceremony. No applause, no cameras. Just work. Inside the briefing room, the lights were low. Screens already displayed redacted footage from the ceremony, faces blurred, names removed. Colonel Drosser stood at the front, arms crossed. "You understand why this changes things," he said. Arya nodded. "Yes, sir. You can't go back to being invisible." She met his eyes. "I don't need to." He studied her for a long moment, then nodded once. "Get some rest," he said. "Tomorrow we fly early." Later, alone in her quarters, Arya sat on the edge of the bunk, boots off, hands resting on her knees. For the first time that day, the silence wasn't tactical. It was human. She felt the weight then, not of the insults, those were gone, but of the years spent carrying something no one saw, of the version of herself that had learned to endure without being held. She lay back and stared at the ceiling. Not broken, just tired and hopeful, because tomorrow she would fly again. Not to prove anything, not to be seen, but because some missions only trust the ones who learn to survive being overlooked. And because sometimes the strongest thing a person can do is wait until the truth is undeniable. Why did sleep refuse to come, even when the room was finally quiet? Because silence has a way of replaying everything sound once covered. Arya lay on her back, hands folded on her chest, eyes open. The ceiling fan turned slowly above her, its faint whir a rhythm she knew how to count. 3 seconds per rotation. Consistent, predictable, unlike memory. The base had gone dark hours ago. Lights dimmed, voices gone. Somewhere far off a generator hummed like a distant tide. This place was supposed to feel safe, controlled, earned. Yet her body remained alert. She had trained herself to sleep anywhere, dirt floors, cargo holds, tents ripped by wind. But tonight, rest hovered just out of reach, because today hadn't been a mission. It had been exposure. She rolled onto her side and stared at the wall, where a faint shadow traced the outline of her flight helmet resting on the table. For years, the helmet had been her boundary. When it was on, nothing got through that wasn't necessary. But today, the helmet had come off in front of everyone. And something in her hadn't known how to close again. She remembered the moment before the Apache arrived, the exact second before sound swallowed the field. The way she'd felt small then, not physically, existentially, like she was standing at the center of a judgment she hadn't consented to. It surprised her how much that moment still hurt. People assumed soldiers were immune to shame. That training burned it out. That resilience meant numbness. They were wrong. Resilience meant learning how to carry pain without letting it steer. Her wrist vibrated softly. A message. She reached for it, already knowing who it would be. "Rowan, you awake?" it read. She hesitated, then typed back. "Yeah." A pause, then. "Walk." 10 minutes later, they stood outside beneath the floodlights near the flight line. The night air was cooler here, carrying the smell of fuel and steel. The Apache rested in silhouette, dark shapes against darker sky. Rowan leaned against a barrier, arms crossed loosely. He didn't look at her right away. "They're calling it a win," he said eventually. Arya nodded. "Figures." "You don't sound convinced." "I didn't fly today," she replied. "I was extracted." Rowan glanced at her then, studied her face the way only someone who'd seen her under fire could. "You did what you had to." "That's the problem," she said quietly. "So did they. They thought they were right." Rowan frowned. "They humiliated you." "They believed a story," Arya said, "and they built a system that rewarded believing it." She paused, then added, "That's harder to fight than a person." Rowan let that sit. "I watched your face," he said, "when the crowd went quiet." Arya didn't respond. "You didn't look angry," he continued. "You looked relieved and tired." She exhaled slowly. "I trained myself not to need acknowledgement," she said. "Today reminded me I'm still human." Rowan nodded once. No judgment, just understanding. "Command's already asking what you want next," he said. "Media requests, interviews, recruitment campaigns." Arya's jaw tightened. "I don't want to be a symbol," she said. "Too late," Rowan replied gently. "You already are." She turned away, staring at the dark horizon. "I just wanted to fly," she said. "I didn't want to explain myself to people who never listened." Rowan stepped closer, not invading, just present. "You don't owe them explanation," he said. "You owe yourself peace." She almost laughed at that, almost, because peace wasn't something she'd trained for. The next morning came early. Briefing room, coffee bitter, screens alive with maps and mission outlines. The room felt familiar again, grounding. Here everything had purpose. Colonel Drosser entered last. "Before we begin," he said, eyes on Arya, "there's something you should know." She straightened instinctively. "The school district has been suspended pending investigation," he continued. "Federal oversight initiated, staff placed on leave." Arya absorbed it without reaction. And he added, "The cafeteria worker you mentioned, she's been located, offered protection and compensation." That did something. Not visible, but real. "Thank you, sir," Arya said. Drosser studied her for a moment. "You could have requested a lot more." Arya met his gaze. "I didn't need revenge. I needed accountability." The colonel nodded, satisfied. The mission briefing began. New coordinates, new objectives, different continent. Good. But even as data filled the screen, Arya felt something shift beneath the surface. A pressure she hadn't anticipated. Visibility changes threat profiles. She'd spent years unnoticed. Now she was known. And that came with risk. Later that afternoon, as she prepped her aircraft, a young mechanic approached hesitantly, fresh-faced, nervous. "Lieutenant," he said, "I just wanted to say my sister's like you, quiet. Everyone thinks she's failing." Arya paused. "She's not," she said. The mechanic smiled, relief flooding his face. "I'll tell her that." As he walked away, Arya realized something uncomfortable. Her story wasn't hers alone anymore. That night, as the sun dipped low and the sky burned amber, Arya climbed into the cockpit again. Familiar rituals grounded her. Switches, checks, breath. The tower cleared her for takeoff. As the Apache lifted, she felt it, the old certainty. The clean simplicity of motion and purpose. Up here the noise faded. Below her the world looked different, smaller, less personal. She banked west, following the planned route. Mountains stretched ahead, ancient and unbothered. Her comms crackled. "Talon 1, Rowan's voice. You're clear." "Copy," she replied. As the aircraft surged forward, Arya felt something loosen inside her chest. Not closure. Integration. She didn't have to erase who she'd been to become who she was. The failing student. The silent girl. The pilot. They were all true. And for the first time, she didn't feel the need to separate them. Because strength wasn't about proving people wrong. It was about continuing forward once the truth was known. And somewhere behind her, a town was learning that lesson too late. Sometimes the quiet ones aren't weak. They're just busy becoming something the world isn't ready to understand. "You said." Why did the mission briefing feel heavier than usual, even before a single word was spoken? Because this time, the stakes weren't just operational. They were personal. Arya sat at the table, hands folded, eyes on the map glowing softly in the center of the room. Red markers pulsed in slow intervals. A valley, rugged terrain, narrow airspace. The kind of place mistakes didn't echo, they ended. Colonel Drosser cleared his throat. "This is a live extraction," he said. "Hostiles embedded among civilians. No margin for error." Arya absorbed the details automatically. Wind shear patterns, elevation, heat signatures, all familiar. But then he added something that shifted the air. "The asset is a teenager." Silence. "A girl," he continued. "Local, quiet, teachers wrote her off. Family dismissed her concerns. She noticed something no one else did." Arya's jaw tightened, almost imperceptibly. "She transmitted coordinates before going dark," Drosser said. "That transmission saved 3 Allied lives." The room stayed quiet. Arya didn't speak. She didn't need to. They all knew why this mission had been assigned to her. The Apache thundered low through the valley hours later, hugging terrain, rotors slicing thin air. Arya flew with restraint, not aggressive, not showy, just precise. "Contact in 30 seconds, Rowan said over comms. Arya adjusted heading by a fraction. The HUD pulsed. She felt the familiar narrowing of focus, the world reduced to angles and vectors and breath. Yet beneath it all, another awareness hummed. The girl. She imagined her waiting somewhere below, watching shadows, listening for sounds no one else noticed, being told she was wrong, too sensitive, dramatic. Arya knew that space. The extraction point appeared, a collapsed building near a dry riverbed. Heat signatures flickered. Civilians too close. Arya held fire. "Hold," she said quietly. "We go in clean." Rowan didn't question it. The team fast-roped down with silent efficiency. Arya hovered steady, compensating for microbursts, hands relaxed but unyielding on the controls. Seconds stretched. Her pulse remained calm. She remembered another time she'd hovered like this years ago, waiting while a voice crackled through her earpiece. A boy, 15, panicked, whispering coordinates from a basement while his town burned. She'd held then too, because sometimes restraint saved more lives than force. "Asset secured," came the call. Arya exhaled slowly. But as the team moved to extract, a new heat signature bloomed fast, armed, close. Arya's grip tightened. "Rowan," she said, 9 o'clock behind the ridge." "I see it." The hostile moved toward the team's position, weapon raised. Arya had seconds. She could fire, end the threat, accept the collateral risk. Or she could do something harder. She dipped the Apache low, rotors screaming, kicking up dust and debris in a violent wall. The blast of wind knocked the hostile off balance, slamming him into the ground without a shot fired. The team moved fast. "Nice flying," Rowan said, breathless. Arya didn't respond. She was watching the girl being lifted into the aircraft. Small, shaking, eyes wide with the kind of fear that comes from not being believed. When the girl looked up and saw Arya through the cockpit glass, something happened. Recognition. Not of rank, not of uniform. Of similarity. The girl mouthed something. "Thank you." Arya nodded once. The Apache climbed hard, leaving the valley behind. On the return flight, the girl sat wrapped in a thermal blanket, fingers clenched tightly around the edge. She didn't speak, didn't cry. Arya respected that. At base, medics moved in. Questions followed, statements, debriefs. The girl answered carefully, precisely, like someone used to being doubted. When it was over, she looked at Arya. "They told me I was imagining it," the girl said softly, "that I wasn't smart enough to know." Arya removed her helmet. "You were," she replied. "They just didn't listen." The girl swallowed. "You listened." Arya hesitated, then said, "I learned how." Later, alone again, Arya sat outside beneath the fatting light. The air was cool, quiet. She felt the weight of the day settle in her bones. Not exhaustion. Responsibility. Being seen meant being followed. Being believed meant being watched. And being an example meant never fully being alone again. Rowan joined her, offering a bottle of water. "You okay?" he asked. Arya considered the question. "I don't know yet," she said honestly, "but I will be." Rowan nodded. "That's usually how it goes." She looked up at the sky, now deepening into indigo. Somewhere beyond it, more missions waited. More people who wouldn't know her name but would trust her with their lives. She didn't need applause. She needed purpose. And as the night settled in, Arya understood something new. Redemption wasn't about proving others wrong. It was about protecting the ones who were still unheard. Because once you know what it feels like to be dismissed, you don't let it happen again if you can stop it. And sometimes, the quietest victories are the ones that save someone before they ever learn how to endure silence. Why did the quiet after the mission feel heavier than the danger itself? Because danger ends. Meaning doesn't. Arya stood alone on the tarmac as dawn crept in, the sky pale and uncertain, like it hadn't decided what kind of day it wanted to be. The Apache rested behind her, engines cooling, metal ticking softly as if exhaling after holding its breath too long. The smell of fuel lingered, sharp and grounding. She welcomed it. Smells didn't judge. They just existed. She hadn't slept. Not because of adrenaline, not because of fear. Because her mind wouldn't stop walking backward. She kept seeing the girl's face, the way her hands shook even after she was safe, the way she spoke with precision as if every word had to earn its place. That wasn't a child's instinct. That was a survival skill. Arya knew it well. She moved toward the edge of the tarmac where the base gave way to open land. The horizon stretched wide and indifferent. That was one of the reasons she loved flying. Up there, perspective was honest. You saw how small things really were. Down here, everything felt closer. Her wrist buzzed, a secure message. Command wanted a debrief addendum. Media interest was still growing. Recruitment divisions were already framing narratives, overcoming adversity, hidden genius, from failure to flight. Arya deleted the message without responding. Those stories were neat, clean, comfortable. They left out the cost. Later that morning, she was called into a smaller room. No screens, no observers, just Colonel Drosser and a woman in civilian clothes with sharp eyes and a quiet presence. "This is Dr. Alina Marsh," Drosser said. "Behavioral analysis, advisory." Arya nodded politely. Dr. Marsh didn't smile. She didn't frown either. She studied Arya the way terrain is studied, not to judge but to understand. "You've become a symbol," Marsh said gently, "whether you want to or not." Arya folded her hands. Symbols don't get tired. Marsh tilted her head. "People do." Silence settled between them. Not uncomfortable, just real. "We're not here to take anything from you," Marsh continued. "We're here to make sure this doesn't take everything from you." Arya considered that. "For years," Marsh said, "you survived by being unseen. Now the world sees you. That can feel like exposure all over again." Arya's throat tightened slightly. She didn't speak. Marsh leaned forward. "What do you want, Lieutenant? Not strategically, personally." Arya stared at the table, the scratches in the surface. Old, repaired, still useful. "I want to fly," she said finally. "And I want the people who feel invisible to know they're not broken." Marsh nodded. "Then we help you do that on your terms." The meeting ended quietly. No directives, no pressure. That mattered. In the afternoon, Arya visited the medical wing, not for herself. The girl from the valley sat on the edge of a bed, legs dangling, swinging slightly as if unsure whether stillness was allowed. She looked up when Arya entered. "You don't have to come," the girl said quickly. "They already asked me everything." Arya sat in the chair across from her. "I wanted to," she replied. The girl studied her uniform, then her face. "They're sending me somewhere safe," she said. "A school. They said I'm gifted." Arya smiled faintly. "You always were." The girl hesitated. "Do they stop listening once you leave?" Arya felt that one land deep. "Sometimes," she said honestly, "but not always, and when they don't, you learn how to speak louder or smarter." The girl nodded, absorbing that. "Does it get easier?" she asked. Arya thought of the years, the silence, the weight. "No," she said, "but it gets clearer, and clarity helps." The girl smiled then, small, real. When Arya left the medical wing, she felt something settle inside her chest. Not closure. Alignment. That evening she walked alone again, this time without armor, without rank. Just a woman moving through space. The sun dipped low, painting the sky in colors no screen could replicate. She thought of the school, of the chair in the last row, the laughter, the certainty with which people decided who she was. She didn't hate them. Hate required energy she didn't want to spend. What she felt instead was distance. Not superiority, perspective. They had measured worth by visibility, by noise, by compliance. She had learned worth was quieter than that. Rowan found her near the hangars as night settled. "They're grounding you tomorrow," he said lightly. "Mandatory rest." She raised an eyebrow. "That's a first." He smiled. "You earned it." They stood in silence for a while, watching technicians move like shadows between aircraft. "You ever think about going back?" Rowan asked. "Not to the school, just to that version of you." Arya considered the question carefully. "No," she said, "but I think about carrying her forward." Rowan nodded. "She did good." "Yes," Arya said softly, "she did." Later, alone in her quarters, Arya unpacked the last of her gear. At the bottom of her bag was the crumpled graduation program, the one with the asterisk next to her name. She smoothed it out, folded it once, then placed it in a drawer. Not as a reminder of pain, but as evidence. She lay back on the bunk and closed her eyes. This time sleep came. Not because everything was resolved, but because she no longer felt divided. The girl who had been mocked, the woman who flew, the soldier who waited. They were the same person. And somewhere someone else was sitting in the last row of their own life, being overlooked, mislabeled, underestimated. Arya hoped they'd hold on. Because sometimes dignity doesn't announce itself. It doesn't argue. It doesn't beg to be believed. Sometimes dignity endures quietly, until the moment comes when it rises, steady and undeniable, and acts.